Well, welcome back to my discussion of the petition to the APA. So, this is the third in the series here. I talked about sort of the origins, context of it, and then how I got triggered into writing the petition to the APA by a parent version that they submitted the first time. So now let's talk about what I did and what I saw. So, I have obligations under for standard 1.05 to do something. They're required, they're mandatory, and they give examples. So the licensing boards were shut down because they're disabled. The AFCC is the uh, agency or group kind of supporting the unethical malpractice and collusive child abuse of the forensic psychologists. So they're shut down, although I did go and present to them and tell them 2017. And I do recommend that parents tell the licensing boards when there's unethical malpractice. That's what you're supposed to do. And that's what psychologists are supposed to tell you to do when there's unethical malpractice by another psychologist. We're supposed to kind of inform you of your rights and your options for having those concerns addressed. So I am. I know the boards aren't going to do anything. I know because they're controlled by the forensic psychologists. But that's what you should do. Plus, it's not just about you. It's about the right thing to do. It's about each other. So whether or not they respond to you, it's helpful to do the right thing, to let everybody know and follow the proper procedures. So those avenues are shut down. So the APA, though, is the one who should come up because you guys, forensic psychology is an experiment. You guys are guinea pigs for an experiment in a new form of service delivery. Okay. No one else gets their own special psychologist, just you. And the service delivery, new form of service delivery was developed in the 1980s, an experimental new approach called forensic psychology. And they kicked all the clinical psychologists out. You're not allowed to make custody recommendations if you don't do a custody evaluation. There's no justification for that, but that's what they said. You have to do what we do, this forensic evaluation. Then they have to come up with this big forensic evaluation. It is a monstrosity. It solves nothing. It's psychometrically, it is a mess. It's conceptually a mess. It's a mess. But it generates so many hours, $20,000 to $40,000, and they can do it over 6 to 9 months because they get given carte blanche to do whatever they want, and there's no oversight. There is no oversight to they're just like kids in a candy store, and the candy store is your bank account. So they can just do whatever they want because all of your complaints will get shunted over to other forensic psychologists who are all doing the same thing. So they just say, nope, everything's fine. And they refuse to sanction any forensic psychologist for anything because they are doing the same thing. So that's a thing. So what my report in Oregon or Dorsey-Pruder, my report to the custody resolution method in Dorsey resulted in a licensing board complaint against the involved psychologist, the forensic psychologist in Oregon. So then they come back and retaliate against me because there was a licensing board complaint against the forensic psychologist. So I know they cover up. I've known that since the beginning. Isn't it obvious? If you have massive unethical malpractice in the family courts, who's responsible for making sure we have quality? The licensing boards. They do in clinical psychology, everywhere else, clinical ADHD, autism, they're not having problems with incompetence. Everybody knows and is using established knowledge in every other domain of psychology, except in the family courts, except for you and your own special psychologist that you are forced to use. Holy Toledo. So, but the APA needs to get over here. They need to clean up this mess. And it's going to become a bigger and bigger mess once the forensic psychologists are exposed. And then your Gardnerian people, their kind of history, the flying monkeys are pretty much taking them out with Caden's Law. And they're going to take out the forensic psychologists. So you're not going to have any psychologists in the family courts, except a few domestic violence, flying monkey types who believe all allegations are true. That's the psychologists you're going to wind up with, or the mental health people you're going to wind up with in the family courts, is the ones who believe that all allegations should be believed as true. And you can see that in Caden's law moving through. And so if you don't get on the ball pretty soon, you're going to be really, really stuck. I was your last hope, because the forensic psychologists are gone, the Gardnerians are gone, and you're left with this flying monkey group of domestic violence people and sex abuse people. I was your last hope, but I'm out of the family courts now because it's too dangerous for me. And I should not have to put up my license. I did. I sacrificed it for you to expose the forensic psychologists on the licensing boards. I did that with semi-intent. I didn't know when, where, or whatever, but you've heard me saying how slamming the forensic, they're ignorant like a rock and unethical and stuff. I'm really annoying them. And you call me stupid, and you're stupid, pathogen, and arrogant, and all this sort of stuff. They want to hurt me. They want to get back at me. I'm exposing their ignorance and incompetence. I'm creating a narcissistic injury, is what it's called. So I'm creating a narcissistic injury in the forensic psychologist by exposing their inadequacy. That's going to motivate them to want to retaliate against me specifically. Now, if I just work with attorneys, I'm going to stay safe, and they won't have an avenue to retaliate against me. They'll keep trying, and they have, but they won't find one. But I could make myself appear vulnerable if I provided consultation to Dorsey Pruder in the custody resolution method. Now, one of the reasons I did was because, holy cow, that she developed a whole research project that's solid. And so, yeah, I'm going to support somebody over here that's trying to solve it and develop a research project that's solid. But that exposed me, or seemed to expose me, and now I get the attack. So that's the situation. I got to leave the family courts. I've sacrificed. I've done everything I can. I sacrificed. I took a full hit on my license for your benefit. It's not an ethical violation. I want to point that out. It's a jurisdictional violation. They expanded their jurisdiction to specifically sanction me. Now I've got you that evidence that you can use with your licensing boards in Colorado or Texas or North Carolina. As you start to work with your legislators, you don't have to focus on you can say, look at Oregon. You can hold Oregon up as the poster child of the infestation of the pathogen into the licensing boards. And so get your people over, and there'll be review and upheavals, primarily a lot because things like the New York Blue Ribbon Commission on Forensic Custody Evaluations. They're voted 11-9 to get rid of forensic evaluations in the New York family courts. Their time is limited. Once you overturn the rock, it's forensic psychology is a nasty place. And so they figure who comes over to the family courts. No clinical psychologist was too dangerous. So who comes over here? People who cannot get a job working out in the real world. Look at my vita. I'm working out in the real world. Okay. People are hiring me. Or if I'm in private practice, actually people come to me voluntarily because I'm so good. And then so people come to me. But these forensic psychologists, nope, they can't. Nobody hires them. So they go into the family court, put their name on a list because they have to get court-ordered clients. And then they kind of fill in around that $20,000 to $40,000 for an assessment. You only need to do a couple of those a year and you'll be okay. And so, yeah, they can't get clients. So who do you get over here? You get the lowest quality mental health person. Example, proof. This is proof of that you have the lowest quality of mental health people in the family courts. Patients should never have to explain the pathology to a doctor. That should just never, ever happen. But in the family courts, we have you guys routinely explaining what the pathology is to your forensic psychologist. Oh my goodness, it is so bad over here. So ultimately, the APA, American Psychological Association, is going to have to get over here and get this settled out. They're the ones that tried this experiment with you. And it is an experiment, okay, that no other group of people, pathology, ADHD, nobody else. It gets their own special psychologist, just you know. And interestingly, the psychologists, Stahl and Simon, they're special psychologists who don't diagnose or treat the pathology they work with, and who specifically say, it's not my role to help people or alleviate suffering. But those are the psychologists you're forced to use, and you're not allowed to use the other ones because if you try, they refuse to come here because it's too dangerous because of the forensic psychologists and licensing. So, yeah, you're kind of stuck. Um, and I'm surprised you can't develop a class action lawsuit off of this. But I documented in the AFCC in 2017 their collusion. They know, they just don't care. Documented the American Psychological Association 2018. That's what a lot of this is about, is documenting them into the class action lawsuit as one of the deep pockets. But that leaves a third element, which was the the licensing boards. And until we get a cleanse on them, because they're the ones that's supposed to be enforcing these standards of practice. And oh my goodness. So it's the infestation of the pathogen into the licensing boards and then disabling the licensing boards that is a significant contributor to what you have over here. And so I needed to get you documentation on that as well. So I made myself appear a little bit vulnerable. Oh man, I've had to be so careful because I didn't know when, where, or how the forensic psychologists would attack me. But I knew they would. So I had to work. Everything I did had to be prepared for that attack. And finally, they saw their opportunity in Oregon for some reason, and because it resulted in the board complaint against the forensic psychologist. Other places, it was just involved in the family courts, is when it gets a board complaint against them that then triggered them to retaliate. And they thought because they have the power, they can just do that. Kind of an arrogant, haughty grandiosity that they've grown to endure. And because they can. They can, yep, you're absolutely right. They can sanction me. There's nothing I can do about it. So here's your $7,500 for what you think I was practicing in Oregon. You know, I wasn't practicing in Oregon. But here's your money, and I'll just leave the family courts and go away because now it's too dangerous for me for a variety of reasons based on that decision. So they've succeeded in what they wanted to do, which was drive away Dr. Childress, who was exposing their unethical malpractice. So the licensing boards are covering up for the forensic psychologist. They're doing it in Oregon, but they're doing it all over the states. You just can't prove it in all the other states. But you don't need to now because you proved it in Oregon, or I proved it in Oregon, that you can now take that back to your legislators and take that back to everybody and say, it's happening in our state too. Cite to the Blue Ribbon Commission and say, they're saying it should be gone from the state. Why is it still here? And why is it still on our licensing boards if they're saying it's harmful to children and dangerous? And these same people who are conducting these awful forensic custody evaluations that need to be banned are sitting on the licensing boards, hearing your complaints against the other forensic psychologists. Take it to the licensing boards, but take it also to the APA. Okay, same argument to the APA because they need to step in on this. Now, when they do finally show up and say, "Oh, well, what's going on in the family courts?" That's when you can hit them up with this and say, "We told you years ago, but you didn't do anything. Why didn't you do anything back here?" They have, each psychologist who sees this has the same 1.05 ethical obligations I do, mandatory. If they learn about possible ethical violations, they're required to do something. So what did they do to discharge their ethical violations? The other thing I would do this with this right now is I would get an answer for them. Two answers. First, who did you give this to? Okay, you said you gave it to a committee. Who was the committee? Who was on the committee? And what did they find? What was the output of that committee? What happened to this? Who did you give it to off of this? And then the second thing you're going to want to know is, What's your answer? Okay, we asked, we said, please give us these three remedies. Tell us yes or no and a reason. But just to ignore you parents in the family courts, that is such contempt. You are worthless to the APA. You are of zero value to them, not even worth giving you an answer to your concerns about these ethical violations. They don't care. That's the link into the class action lawsuit. They don't care. They failed in their responsibility. But the other thing I would do with this is send it over to the ethics committee of the APA, saying, what did the APA violate standard 1.05 relative to their obligations, relative to the ethical violations that they've learned about? That's one question for the ethics committee. The second question is, what's happening in forensic psychology? What is the outcome of this exposure of the ethical violations? What are they doing about it? The APA Ethics Committee, what is the APA generally doing about it? And prompt that discussion. It's called self-reflective insight. It's an executive function. Prompt that discussion within the APA. If you start activating their frontal lobes, forcing them to linear logical thinking and self-reflective insight, that they'll start beginning to process the information, because right now they're just dead like a rock. So let me move over to the final sort of discussion of the petition of the APA and where we kind of stand with that situation.